There's some new faces around the federal cabinet table for the Liberals as the Prime Minister unveiled the new bench to lead the country out of the pandemic and toward recovery. 39 ministers in all, including a couple of new portfolios, emergency preparedness and housing. But will this group get the job done? Hello and welcome to Unpublished TV. I'm Ed Hand. We're coming to you from a remote location and practicing physical distancing to enhance safety. While the new government signaled it wanted to get down to business right away, it still took more than a month to name the new cabinet, and this government won't be sitting in the House for another 3 weeks. Creating a cabinet requires more than just picking your strengths or your favorites. Gender, geography, experience, electoral success will all play a part. Now, this current crop of cabinet ministers features many faces that have slipped over the last few years. And our Unpublished.vote question asks, which cabinet minister will be the first to be shuffled out? Melanie Joly in Foreign Affairs at 22.5%, Anita Anand in Defense at 12.4%, Stephen Guilbeault in Environment at 29.2%, Jean-Yves Duclos in Health at 7.9%, Patty Hajdu in Indigenous Affairs at 16.9%, Other at 4.5%, and none of the above, 6.7%. Now, however you're watching and listening to our show, whether through our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, or our podcast channel, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more, I'd like to remind you can still cast your vote on this topic at unpublished.vote and then email your MP to tell them why. Joining us to discuss the new cabinet, I am pleased to be joined by Tasha Carradine, public policy analyst and political commentator. Nelson Wiseman is a professor of political science at the University of Toronto, and Mario Canseco is the president of Research Co. in Vancouver. And we'll start off with you, Tasha. And in terms of this cabinet, what's your overall view?
My overall view, really, Ed, is that it's in line with Trudeau's vision of big government. He's got key players such as Chrystia Freeland in the big, I guess, the biggest chair you could have, deputy PM and finance at the same time. He's got people who share his vision on the environment, even perhaps a little further in the progressive vein in the form of Mr. Guilbeault. And he's also put a lot of emphasis on, again, parity of women and men, representation in terms of regions. That was a takeaway I found very interesting because it has both electoral and economic implications. Every economic development, ministry, for lack of better words, it is now a ministry, has its own minister. So you've got a lot of focus on regional economic development across the country, which implies a lot of money will probably be flowing to sustain that.
Nelson, when you look at the size of a cabinet, and this is one of the bigger ones, is that an indication of big plans or is it an indication of something else?
Well, to me, it's just an indication that he's trying to please a lot of potential constituencies by having all the boxes tick off. Tasha mentioned the number, gender parity, visible racialized Canadians, regions, that sort of thing. The larger the cabinet is, the less significant the total cabinet is. Because what happens is that, in effect, you end up having an inner cabinet, and you have all of these cabinet committees on which ministers sit, although they don't attend, some of them don't attend very often. And then whatever they do gets reported back up. My other general observation is that cabinet doesn't count for as much as it used to, no matter what the size is, and that is because of the concentration of power in the PMO. For example, we have all these ministries now, departments responsible for economic development in this region and in that region, but in the PMO now, we have regional desks. And so once upon a time, if you were the minister, let us say from Saskatchewan, you signed off on things that were going to happen in Saskatchewan. Now, hey, there's somebody in the Prime Minister's office who's got the Prime Minister's ear that's working on this. So that whole dynamic has changed.
Mario, the distribution of ministers, we've got 4 in Atlantic Canada, we have 4 for British Columbia, none for Manitoba. Obviously you like to reward those who obviously help you get elected, but by shutting out a province, are you not, we hear about division all the time. Is that not just going to lead to more division?
I think it will, and it's certainly something that is changing over time. After the 2015 election, when Justin Trudeau got the most votes for any Liberal Party leader since 1968 in British Columbia, BC had a seat at the table. We had the Justice Minister, we had the Defense Minister, and now we have neither. So, it's not as dire as the days of Jean Chrétien's governments when we only had a Minister of Western Diversification, whatever that meant, because nobody could explain it to us here in BC. But it's not the same thing that we had. And I think, part of it is 2015 was a very monumental success for the Liberals. They got more than a third of the vote. If we go back to the 2011 election under Michael Ignatieff, they only had 2 seats. So it's changing. I think it's going back to the way BC has always voted, where the center-right gets more votes and the Liberals are in second or in third place. And I think it shows with the cabinet, because we do have ministers. We just don't have the ministers that are as important as the ones we had in the 2 previous cabinets.
Tasha, well, when we're taking a look at appointments, sometimes they're meant to send a message. Whether it's a message for the minister or maybe a message for the portfolio or where they're going to be going. What's the message, in your opinion, by putting Stephen Guilbeault in environment?
Well, the message we've already seen is basically, a bit of a slap in the face to Alberta, and it's been received as such. You've got Guilbeault at environment/climate change and Mr. Wilkinson at resources, and the combination of that, especially Mr. Guilbeault, whose record with Greenpeace and Équiterre is clearly anti-oil, and there's no bones about it. The Prime Minister at COP26 was very clear on where he's going in terms of the eventual end of oil production. This is something that is a great concern to Alberta, and I think also the failure to recognize the efforts being made by industry there to find ways to exploit oil to get it out of the ground in a more environmentally or ecologically friendly fashion with things like carbon capture and others. Mr. Guilbeault is not really known for recognizing those things either. So I think that overall, it's not friendly to that region, to Alberta and to Saskatchewan too. And I think that the Liberals did try and, they also appointed an MP from Edmonton to their cabinet. But I think that overall, that their expectation is probably that they're not going to be cultivating great gains in the West. They're using that to cultivate gains in the East in the markets they think will be favorable to their environmental views.
It seems a bit self-defeating. You're not even going to, try to participate out in Alberta.
Well, it is somewhat self-defeating. I think that, it clearly sets up an opposition to Jason Kenney. And I think that there's a vulnerability that Trudeau senses there, which he will translate to the federal Conservatives. It already happened in the last election. The sense that Mr. Kenney's fortunes are also tied to those of Mr. O'Toole's and the federal Tories. And so anything he can do to create discord, I guess, or to pick at those bad fortunes in Alberta is sort of a boon electorally was a boon to the Liberals in the last election. And every organizer I spoke to said that once Mr. Kenney had to reverse himself on COVID mandates because of what was happening there, it was welcome news in the Liberal ranks, and the Tories were just, devastated. In the last few days, it made a big difference in the campaign. So I think he's going to pursue that strategy of division, which I think is very unfortunate.
What do you think, Nelson? Stephen Guilbeault, obviously big into climate change, and now the Minister of Environment. It did not go over well in Alberta. And do you think that was a plan, or they're trying to work to his strength?
Let me just push back on a couple of things. If I'm not mistaken, Ed, you suggested that Manitoba didn't have a cabinet minister?
Yeah, didn't Jim Carlos?
Well, but it does. Although I have no idea what he looks like. His name is Vandal, and he's in the portfolio of Veterans Affairs, which is not a terribly important portfolio, but it just goes to show that if they elect anybody, and in fact, there are a number of Liberal MPs from Manitoba, so he had a choice. Vandal won't have much impact on anything, in my opinion, and he's just there as the adornment to be able to say to Manitobans, we have somebody. Now, let me get back to your point about Guilbeault and Tasha's point about him. What strikes me about Guilbeault isn't how out of the mainstream he is, but how he's come around. Here, he's already pointed out, hey, he supported buying the Trans Mountain Pipeline as a cabinet minister. He supports the Line 5, which is now contentious in the United States. They're not going to shut down outfits like Suncor. The reality is we're moving into a different world, and I think it's going to be measured. But the oil industry is going to continue. It won't be operating the way it would have otherwise. Now, with respect to Kenney, it doesn't matter who Trudeau would have appointed. Kenney is such a rabid partisan, he would have attacked whoever Trudeau appointed. Remember, Trudeau's first natural resources minister was a Westerner, Jim Carr. That didn't keep Kenney and other Westerners from attacking the federal Liberals. The reality is the federal Liberals haven't really been viable in Western Canada, except for some seats in Winnipeg and Vancouver, since 1953. And nobody was talking environment then. There's a whole host of regional issues that explain why the West doesn't, and I am from Manitoba, why the West doesn't vote for Liberals. And I can give you a couple of examples. One of them is what led to the rise of the Reform Party, which was that in 1987, there was a bidding contract going out for maintenance of the CF-18 fighters that Canada's Air Force flies. And although the Winnipeg bid, there was a Winnipeg bid, a Montreal bid. The Winnipeg bid was superior. It was recommended by the bureaucracy. It was cheaper. No, the contract went to Montreal because the Mulroney cabinet was Quebec heavy. Similarly, in the past week, we've had this storm about the fact that the CEO of Air Canada, whose name is Russo, doesn't speak French. But the real issue here isn't that he doesn't speak French. My problem is, why is Air Canada headquartered in Quebec? That's what a Westerner would say. The hub for Air Canada de facto is in Toronto. Moreover, Air Canada used to have its overhaul and maintenance facilities in Winnipeg. Those also got shifted to Montreal when Air Canada was a public corporation back in the 60s under the senior Trudeau. Why? Because the majority of his caucus was also from Quebec. So the West has historically lost out because it hasn't had the numbers. But that is now changing because Alberta is getting more seats. And BC as well. This has really happened in the last 20, 30 years. And then if you think about it, if the Liberals are such a wipeout in Alberta, I noticed they won 2 seats. And I would look at their popular vote. I don't know if it was up or down, but I don't think it was down dramatically if it was.
All right. Now, Mario, Stephen Guilbeault in environment and the reaction from Alberta, obviously not really surprising. I want you to weigh in on this one too.
Well, the reality here is it's a tough job to be the federal minister of environment. We live in a province that always has protests, that always has a situation where people are dissatisfied. And since the start of the pandemic, we've had very shifting priorities on these matters. It started as a protest against the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Now that it's done, the numbers really haven't moved. When we ask the general population, it seems that it's an issue that has been forgotten. If anything, what has changed is we have more people who are undecided. It's almost like we're polling people who say, are you still asking me about this? And they are very, very really not into it as they were just a few years ago. But then we moved on into what is going to be happening with liquefied natural gas, and we had some protests. Then we moved into old growth logging, and we had some protests. It's a very complex situation because you have a group of people that are definitely dissatisfied with how things are going, but it's not something that is going to be affecting the federal government directly anymore. And I think this is definitely one of the things that made Wilkinson in environment very, very difficult to manage. He's at natural resources now. It's a little bit more removed from some of the situations that you'll see. And what we see here is people who really want something to change when it comes to oil are happy with Guilbault's job. But you also have a significant amount of British Columbians who are dissatisfied with this. So it's not all environmentally friendly in that sense. There's 30, 35, 37% of BC residents who consistently believe that the economy is the number one thing. So it's not something that is blanketed over BC as far as, well, now we have a guy from Greenpeace running the show. There might be some who are very satisfied at the fact that this happened, but there's also some who are terrified about its implications for jobs.
Now, because you're in Vancouver in British Columbia, I wanted to ask you next about Harjit Sajjan. He obviously underwhelmed in defense, and a lot of people wondering why he got another portfolio, even though it's a smaller one. But really, why are you rewarding somebody who didn't really get the job done?
Well, I just think there were so many stories coming out of the first Trudeau cabinet, even international stories, as far as, they got an astronaut in transportation, they got a former soldier in defense. It's very difficult to live up to those expectations and to the hype that caused, especially when we continue to talk about defense in the worst possible way, which is they can't get their act together. There's a bunch of abuse going on, and we continue to have these press conferences and discussions about it. The best defense minister is the one that you don't hear about. And this is definitely problematic for the way he was selling himself. There were also some questions about his role in Afghanistan and how that may have been a little less than he led people to believe. But I was really surprised that he kept a cabinet portfolio. I think the expectation for most people from British Columbia is, he'll become a backbencher and maybe in the next cabinet will do something different. So it was a demotion, but it wasn't a demotion as hard as many people expected.
And Tasha, that puts Anita Anand in defense and comes in with no background in military. Is that a concern?
Well, I think it could be a concern, but I think that the Trudeau realized that the greater concern was to clean up the issue of sexual misconduct in the forces. And Anand has moved very swiftly on that by saying we're going to adopt the recommendations of Justice Arbour, basically outsource justice beyond its traditional military form to civilian justice on these issues. That's a huge step. And she's taken it very quickly. And I think the reason is because the government doesn't want this to fester. Part of that is also because Mr. Sajjan is still in cabinet. To the earlier point Mario made, I was shocked too that he's there. I don't know if it's a question of representation as well for the Indo-Canadian community, if that was a concern, or simply that, Trudeau needed BC representation and that's he felt comfortable with Sajjan staying there. But there's, there was a sense that Sajjan was going to just get the door. You had other players like Mark Garneau, who certainly hadn't messed up the way Sajjan did, and he got the door completely. So what was the rationale there? I think Anand, it's interesting. Your poll earlier said, she was the number 2 choice to be potentially shuffled out. I don't necessarily see that. I think that she probably will, I would say, take cover under the Arbour recommendations, but because of that report and because of what the task that needs to be done, people will give her some space to actually accomplish those things, just because also Sajjan's record on it was just so bad.
Just to go back to the poll numbers, she's second on the list, but that's not the number. She's at 12.4. Melanie Joly's at 22.5, and Stephen Guilbeault at 29.2. So it seems a lot more people are positive about her at least coming in. And Nelson, I'm wondering, when you're talking about a defense ministry, you've got somebody here with no military background, but are fresh eyes needed and sometimes get the job done as opposed to those who have that background?
Well, first off, it depends what the job is. The thing that's catching the public's attention now is sexual misconduct in the military. The whole procurement issues, which are vital and so important, are just too complex for the public to get a handle on. They can grasp when you talk about 10 billion, 20 billion, but they don't know about the hardware. I think the Anita Anand appointment was terrific. And I thought And I'll tell you, look, you don't have to have a background in defense. I'm not sure that's an advantage. Kim Campbell was the defense minister. It didn't hurt her. She became prime minister. John McCallum was Minister of Defense. I don't think he had a military background. I agree with Tasha that you wanted to keep Harjit Sajjan in there, although I was very unimpressed by him, probably because it ticks off the box. Oh, the Indo-Canadian community, which is vital to the Liberal fortunes, still has somebody in the cabinet. And this also speaks to the fact that maybe all these other considerations like gender, racial diversity, and region take away from the fact we should be appointing the best people, which isn't where this conversation started. Now I'll tell you why I think she is a good appointment, because she's got a background in governance. She's a lawyer. She handled the procurement file, I thought, very well in terms of communications and in terms of actual things happening. Compare our procurement history to Australia. We're miles ahead. But the deeper problem in defense is the culture. And that's not, I think, going to change. And that's just rooted in biology. The reality is that you get a lot of jocks that go into the military, and their hormones are raging. And as we're increasing the number of women in the military, it's natural that you're going to have these kinds of situations that arise. It's not like working at the CBC. It's not like working at Imperial Oil. You've got a military force that's overwhelmingly made up of young people, and many are very horny.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Sure, jump in there, Tasha.
I was going to say, women in the military, these issues go way back. This isn't just because women in the military, suddenly there are more of them. I agree there's a misogynist culture, but I think that as a society in particular now in 2021, and for, the Me Too movement that's been around for a number of years, this issue should have been cleaned up a long time ago. And, whether people have hormones or other things, there's absolutely no excuse for this culture to have continued as long as it has. Women have been in the military a long time. This problem has been known about a long time. Successive governments had the chance to clean it up. And one of the ways of doing that would have been to have a zero tolerance policy and outsource the justice piece from the military, where, it basically wasn't meted out, because you wouldn't make a complaint because your superior might be the one, in fact, judging you. People judged each other. It was impossible under those circumstances to actually get this outrooted. So I think, just to say that people will come in here and have a certain mindset, I think that's also false. I think that, young people today, hopefully, have been told that, no means no. And the consent issue is there's a much greater consciousness of that today than there would have been 30, 40 years ago. So I think that, it's almost like giving the government a pass. Nelson, I don't know if that was your intent, but I really don't think that they deserve one. I think that this issue can be tackled and should have been tackled a long time ago.
I agree with everything you say, everything. I lay the blame at the feet of Trudeau. He's been in power all these years. All these things that you flagged were there. What did they do? Nothing. And the reason I'm not as tough on Sajjan, although I'm not impressed by him, is because, in effect, he was told, if problems like this arise, you come running to us in the PMO. He didn't have the authority, actually, to act on this. I'm happy. I think Anita Anand will, because I think this has really hurt the Liberals politically among women. And I agree with your whole analogy. That. Yeah.
There we go. See, we all get along, don't we? Now, Mario, we're not going to leave you out here. Foreign Affairs is now led by Melanie Joly, and there's been a couple of portfolios she had that has not done very well. Is this just rewarding a good soldier, or what's she bringing to the table for Foreign Affairs?
I think it's rewarding a good soldier more than anything. There's an expectation. I think we go back to what Nelson was talking about. You need to have people from Quebec in high-profile positions. This might be one of the situations that Justin Trudeau is thinking about. And also the idea of having something that is flashy. We have a woman in defense, we have a woman in foreign affairs. It's the idea of talking about this in a way where it's not only some sort of tokenism that you have half of your cabinet being men and half of your cabinet being women. They are in good positions. They are going to be making calls that are important. Now, it really depends on what happens after COP26. There's going to be an expectation about what the government is going to be doing and how we can actually salvage anything with the environmental movement. So I think the jury's out on that one. We might have a situation where the phone calls will come. We still have discussions with the United States. We're still dealing with the ramifications of the NAFTA renegotiations under Donald Trump. She's going to be tested. And I think that will be the moment when we'll figure out if this was the right call or not.
All right, Tasha, in looking at the setup for the cabinet, which was the biggest surprise to you and why?
Well, I would say Jolie was a surprise based on her really inadequate performance, I would say, especially on the Netflix file and Heritage. She really, I was surprised she was given this. The fact she didn't go to COP26 to me is an indication the government's not 100% confident in her. She said she had to study up. Okay. But you presumably if somebody was going to be in your cabinet, you think they'd have enough to carry them at least through this conference and then, keep studying on the side because it's a major international event. To me, it tells me that Trudeau is actually still going to be the foreign minister, so to speak, not her. And Sajjan, we already touched on. I was very surprised that he was still in cabinet.
Nelson, what was the biggest surprise to you with this cabinet?
Well, I agree with Tasha. I mean, appointing Jolie, but even the bigger surprise is Marc Garneau got dumped. And I don't know what happened there. Now, I suspect he's a principled guy and he had some serious disagreements, but I'm speculating with Trudeau. And as Tasha says, Trudeau intends to run foreign policy out of his office, which is reasonable. I mean, that when you're dealing with foreign leaders, the person who counts at summits is the prime minister, but it is very telling that she hasn't been at the COP26 conference, which is where she could have gotten to meet other foreign ministers, like the Russian foreign minister who's there. So, look, the big thing is she going to last in this position more than a year? No matter how she performs, because Trudeau just hasn't taken that portfolio seriously. He's treating it as if you're the Minister of Forestry. Once upon a time, that was the most prestigious department in the government. Now, it's run out of the PMO, foreign policy.
And Mario, which cabinet minister was the biggest surprise for you?
Well, not to mention the ones that have already been talked about,
sure.
But from a different standpoint, I think Karina Gould in Families, Children and Social Development. This could be a major breakthrough for the government if they get the $10 a day childcare program implemented in the entire country. And if she's going to be the one cutting those ribbons, I think she's somebody to watch for the next one.
All right. Well, folks, I want to thank you for joining us for today's Unpublished TV and our look at the federal cabinet. Tasha Carradine, public policy analyst and political commentator. Mario Canseco is the president of Research Co. in Vancouver, and Nelson Wiseman, professor of political science at the University of Toronto. Coming up on the next Unpublished TV, COP26 got plenty of headlines. Will it accomplish anything? Thanks for watching Unpublished TV. Stay safe. I'm Ed Hand.